If I was flying anything other than a Cirrus that day, I wouldn't be alive today.
You lose the aircraft, but, you know, I'm walking around.
I am living proof that CAPS works.
The Cirrus airframe parachute system works. Over 60 people are alive today. We want our customers to use it.
We built the airplane around the parachute concept. We knew we wanted this extra safety system, and so we actually designed it in from the very beginning, and quite frankly, that's easier to do.
Alan Klettmeyer, one of the founding principals of the company, had a midair in the mid-'80s. And from that experience, he knew that if we could put a parachute on an airplane, it was something that the customer, all of us, deserve to have as an out in the worst-case scenarios.
We've gone through times in the industry where the industry has looked at Cirrus and said, oh, it's a gimmick, or Cirrus had to put it in because of certification. Those aren't true. What we're after is making aviation safer. We want our airplanes to be the safest airplanes. That's why we design them. That's how we design them. That's always our top goal. We also want aviation to be safer. As a whole, our entire industry can do better. The parachute is part of that whole safety plan. In the beginning, there were a lot of people saying, we don't need parachutes. The macho pilot, I'd never need a parachute. I can land my airplane anyplace. We have to get beyond that. This is a safety device. I don't want somebody to not use it because they're afraid they're going to be embarrassed because they did. It's just the opposite. You should be proud. You know what the fact is? That when you've got a problem, for whatever reason, there is something there that is designed for one reason, and that's to protect the people inside the airplane.
Cirrus is one of the safest airplanes flying today. The parachute is what everyone talks about. It's important to Cirrus that our customers feel safe, that they have the opportunity to fly safely. There's nothing more important to this company.
We're trying to deploy the parachute as fast as we can because in an emergency, every second counts.
In personal flying, there can be situations where either the pilot or the airplane or the passengers, something has happened that we need to get safely to the ground, and that's really what the parachute system is. If something goes so very wrong, and it's so unusual that it does, but only Cirrus has a system that can take you from the air and get you safely to the ground. That's why an airplane needs a parachute.
Today, we can look back at the accident records and say there have been 32 situations where people pulled the parachute handle and survived, 65 people. Or 94 fatal accidents in which 187 people died. So there's a big difference in the results for those pilots. What's more fascinating is that 57 out of those 94, almost 2/3 of the fatal accidents, involved decisions that were almost identical to someone pulling the parachute and surviving.
The debate is over. More than 60 lives saved to date is proof CAPS works.
The CAPS consideration from pre-flight planning on I think it needs to be in the back of your mind from the word go.
You know, I would recommend to any Cirrus pilot to really think about using the parachute in any circumstance where you're not absolutely sure that you're going to have a safe place to land.
But the most important thing is to know that the CAPS system works. It's nothing to be scared of, and it's something you should use if you have an emergency situation. It works and it can save your life.
We don't need heroes. We need people to be safe. So if there's a problem, grab the handle. With every safety device, we also have to train for that. Now, part of it is, well, what training do you need for a parachute? You just reach up, you grab a handle, and you pull on it. But training for that is far more than that physical reaction.
The important thing for owners and operators to think through in their head is to look at the different scenarios that they would deploy the parachute and make it instinctual so that when they're in that situation, they've thought about it before, and even if there's any doubt in their head, pull the parachute.
with a simulator, we can do anything we want, so we can actually put the pilot in a no-win scenario. The only option is to pull the parachute. And what's actually very interesting, when we started doing that, we had pilots in the simulator fight the airplane all the way to the ground. But we're able to create the test where there is no other option. And that has taught us how to teach the parachute.
Cirrus flight instructors have observed that pilots often fail to activate caps in an emergency. This is due to a number of factors, including a lack of training and experience, a loss of situational awareness or task fixation, and hazardous attitudes towards caps. Each of these factors can be overcome through proper training and repetition.
You immediately pull the parachute when you've lost control of the airplane. If you move the control inputs and the plane doesn't do what you expect it to do, you're not in control. Pull the parachute handle.
One possible situation to require caps activation is engine failure. If you are not within gliding distance of a runway, you need to activate caps. If you are within gliding distance of a runway, you must continually evaluate the situation and make sure landing is assured. If reaching a runway before 400 feet AGL or 600 feet AGL in a Generation 5 is not assured, activate caps. Loss of control in such situations as spatial disorientation, spins, icing, structural failure, mid-air collision, pilot incapacitation are all situations that if you lose control of the aircraft, activate caps.
When you get into a situation where you're descending closer to the ground and you don't have a runway to land on right away, pull the handle. When you get into a situation where the pilot is incapacitated and maybe one of the passengers, if they don't know how to land the airplane, pull the handle. Those are the situations, for examples, of when you can immediately use the parachute and survive.
It's so important to predetermine the situations or circumstances that you would use the parachute. It's one of the only ways that you will be able to identify in the air under those circumstances and the stress associated with those circumstances that you need to use the parachute and you must use it right now.
Is this the time to pull caps? The answer should never be no. Not yet may be the right answer. You've got some time to do some troubleshooting, go through the checklist. At the end of the checklist, consider caps again. The answer shouldn't be no. The answer might be not yet. You might be having success in gliding towards an airport. But then think about the hard deck altitude, the altitude below which you won't descend without pulling the parachute.
Deployment sequence for the parachute system is as follows. First, the activation. Activation is simple pull by the pilot. There's a T-handle. Pilot grabs it with two hands, does a chin up, takes about a 40-pound pull, which activates a igniter, which fires off a rocket.
It sounds like a bottle rocket going off behind your head. You might smell a faint gunpowdery type smell.
The rocket extracts the parachute from the bag, pulls it taut, and it puts it in a position where now the parachute can start doing its thing. The first job of the slider is to open up the bottom of the parachute so that you can inflate the parachute quicker than it normally would on its own. Once the air rushes up and starts filling the canopy, the parachute wants to open up rapidly now. The second job of the slider is to hold that bottom of the skirt closed until the airspeed is low enough that it can safely open up the rest of the way. The third job of the slider is that it opens the parachute up symmetrically so that the loads on the parachute are as even as possible, and this allows us to get the most performance out of a given parachute design.
I felt the jolt of the parachute open, and it pulled you back in the seat, but it's not particularly uncomfortable.
After the slider comes down, then there is a last step, which is where the rear harness is released to a level attitude, so the airplane is coming down in essentially a slightly nose-down attitude.
And all of a sudden, you go from looking at the horizon to looking at a lot of trees below you.
Typically, the parachute times are from 4 to 6 seconds in deployment time.
The plane slowed down really, really quickly. And then, with the exception of the alarm going off, it was eerily silent.
When pilots have activated the Cirrus parachute, less than 133 knots and above 1,000 feet, no one has died.
Cirrus has demonstrated that during a CAPS deployment, the loss of altitude from a straight and level flight is 400 feet and 920 feet from a one-turn spin. The maximum speed at which CAPS was demonstrated to during certification was 133 knots. However, the CAPS system was designed for greater speeds, and successful deployments have occurred at speeds as fast as 187 knots.
If you have an engine failure around 500 feet on departure, you must use CAPS immediately. And you're only going to do that if you prepare for that situation on the ground immediately before that takeoff.
When we have people pulling the parachute handle at the right speeds within those demonstrated parameters, everyone has lived.
I've been a pilot for maybe 22 years. I started flying in high school in Laconia, New Hampshire, where I got my pilot's license my senior year.
I've been a pilot since 2000. At that point, I've been flying my Cirrus for about 2.5 years. I had about 700 hours on a plane, so I spent a lot of time. I flew almost every day.
I had filed my flight plan. I'm at Gaithersburg Airport.
I took off and got into heavy IMC conditions at just under 400 feet, maybe 380 feet. And I was in a climbing turn and started to see multiple instrument failures.
We were in great, smooth air at 9,000 feet. I had a little smooth shake from the engine, and all of a sudden a dramatic rise in RPM.
The plane, in probably less than a second or half a second, actually went into a stall. And it spun 90 degrees and went straight down.
The last altitude I saw was 680 feet before I lost my altimeter. And in that split second, I thought, well, I'm in a climbing turn. I might be at 800 feet. I might not be. But I know if I start to descend, I won't have time to pull the chute.
And immediately, when I knew I wasn't in control of that airplane, that was it. I'm going to the parachute.
At that time, I was looking right straight down into somebody's backyard, and I'm going to guess I was probably at 1,000 feet or something like that. And so I said, well, I might be too late, but here goes.
So I had said to myself, and I said this every time I got in a plane, if there's an emergency, I'm going to pull the parachute. I'm not going to try to be super pilot. I'm not going to be one of the guys that try to be super pilot and now he's a dead super pilot. So I made the split-second decision to pull the parachute at that point.
I actually ended up landing right in the neighborhood street. So I just got out of the aircraft and exited the passenger side.
And we just sort of weather vaned, maybe 3 seconds worth, and there we were in the trees.
The plane set down on the ground, I wouldn't say gently, but it wasn't rough either. It was sort of a non-event. I just got out of the plane, and I'm very glad I was flying a Cirrus that day. As far as the naysayers who disregard the importance of a parachute in an airplane, I think these are the same people who will disregard the importance of an airbag in a car or anti-lock brakes. You know, this is an important safety feature that all planes, frankly, should have.
Why do I think people don't pull it? I think they just don't realize the situation they're in. And they're figuring that they can get themselves out of whatever just happened.
I never expected to have to use it. I think, well, you know, this is a big expense to have in here for just the maybe that someday you're going to have to do it with, you know, the thousands of Cirrus planes that are flying. You know, how many of them are going to have to do that? I didn't expect to be one of them.
Realize that it can happen to you. You know, if anybody on this earth, I've got as much flying experience as the next guy, more than the next guy, more than the weekend warrior that's, you know, out having a good time in their airplane. And I have the knowledge of how to fly as much as anybody, you know, how to be safe. And I did all the things to be safe, and I just ran into a series of circumstances that put me in a position where I needed a parachute, and I had it. And, you know, if I didn't have it, I would literally be dead.
Yeah, I'm really not sure I understand the mindset of a Cirrus owner who has a plane with a parachute and they don't use that parachute. I don't understand why people would not use that safety equipment. I'm very glad that I bought a Cirrus. I'm really glad that I decided to use the CAP system when an emergency presented itself.
If you haven't already pictured yourself doing this, it's going to be hard to make that leap of faith, to just pull that handle and slow that thing down. Let the parachute save your life.
The goal in the effort to change the mindset, to consider caps in an emergency situation, is to bring that to front of mind, to bring that to the things that you can think of in a stressful situation. You've got the habits, you've got the plan, you've got the ideas, and then you've got the awareness, thinking about what's going to happen. To maintain that awareness in a stressful situation takes training. It takes developing that habit. It takes talking to people about how you're going to do this. It takes practice in a simulator or in a real airplane. It takes reaching for the handle when you take off every time. Those kinds of efforts start to build the habits and encourage people to rely on the parachute to save their lives.